So if you're building an application, I think you should use an existing package. It's going to be much easier for you. But for the purpose of uh, this video, I think I'm going to build it from scratch, and so that you have a good understanding of how it works. And then when you're ready to apply it to your application or build your application yourself, you should use a package that's managed. For example, you can come here, you can see this one has been edited 16 days ago, right? Space, Spati? I don't even know how to pronounce that. Spacey. And then this one's Zizako in Trust is about a year ago, maybe even 5 years ago. So you can see that this one is well managed. So I would go for this one, right? But I wouldn't necessarily go with this one anymore since it's so outdated, nobody's managing. So if there's a security bug with it, or if Laravel, if you upgrade your Laravel, it doesn't support it anymore, this is probably the better one to go. So use this, but for the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to build roles and permissions from scratch. So without further ado, let's get started. So we just need two roles here, very simple implementation. We'll start by we'll go down to this section, we'll create a new migration. So I always like to start with the database side first. So I'll say PHP artisan make migration, and I'll say roles. I think you can even do, it's okay, we'll say roles. I'll say create roles table, and we'll also create a role user table. So in your system, you should see two migration files. The first one is role. The second one is role user. And if you don't know where your migration file is, it's located under jokes or your main app, database, and migrations. And migrations basically are code written SQL commands. It helps you create your tables so that you can share it with your partner, with your developers, people that you're developing with your team. Sorry, not partners, but teams. So when you're working on an app together, you don't have to keep telling me or sending me your SQL file. You could just update your migration and it'll carry on across. Read more about migrations, I think, in my previous video. So for the first one, I think the recommendation here was just to build a slug for roles, just like this. I think we can just do slug and name. We're good there. We need that. And then for the, actually this is the role user table, right? This is roles. This is the role user. Role user, we're not going to do it like this. For role user, we need to do it like this. User permissions, user roles, here it is. Private, yeah, sure. So what's happening here? Actually, probably I did it a little bit backwards. Go up a little right here. I guess we could just grab that. Roles. Okay, so first, this will create a database record with 5 columns. Your ID, slug name for it, and the full name of the role, and then 2 timestamps, an updated timestamp and a created timestamp. So when you run your migration, it'll create this table, and when you undo your migration, it'll drop the table. The second migration file will create a role user table. Basically, this is a pivot table that pivots the user with the role. So here you can have the user ID and the role ID, and then the user ID is a foreign key ID on users and cascade on delete. So if you delete a user, it'll delete this role as well. And the same goes for role ID, which is a foreign key on roles ID. And down below you can add your primary, and then it'll remove this user. So there we go. So here you can run PHP artisan migrate, and then syntax violation. Skip. Let's open this up. User, role user. So the violation was multiple primary key defined, probably because of this guy. Let's see this. Role user, drop this table, and then run this migration again. There you go. So I just removed the primary key piece. Jokes. So now, I guess we can just refresh. There we go. So here's our roles, which we don't have any, and here's our role user, which we don't have any links either. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create some. So what I like to do is create the model next. So we need a way to interact with these roles, and we don't necessarily need. I guess we could do, yeah, just roles. So we'll open up our editor. Next thing, I'll say PHP artisan make model, and we'll say role. Roles fine. There you go. And then you'll see your model in app and role right there. And then in user, you can now have many roles or one role, right? So you can say in your user model, you can say public function role, and you can say return this as many app. Actually, I think in this case it's belong to. Let's look over here. You built the relationship. It belongs to many class roles permissions. So there you go, like this. Well, actually, this would work too. In the permissions table, in the roles table, through roles users. So you can say belongs to a user belongs to a role, or a role belongs to a user through the role user table. So a user can have many roles. The next thing we need to make is we need to seed the database with some roles. And what I like to do, you can seed the database by creating a new seeder. So you can say PHP artisan DB. What is it? Make seeder? Oh no, it's make seeder. Make seeder, and then say like add roles, and then it'll in your right below it you can have add roles right here, and you can specify here. Say DB. Actually, you can do role. Now that we've created a new role app, we can insert. Maybe not even insert. We can do role equals new role. All roles doesn't matter, and then you can say let's create. It goes like slug equals say role, and name equals super admin. this, save. Do it one more time. I'm just going to hit the database twice here. This will be editor. And then to run this, seeder, you can say PHP artisan db seed class equals add roles. Oh, artisans. This will hopefully seed your DB. Let's see here. Roles, and there we go. Editor, and oh, actually, yeah. I was supposed to copy this. Let's try that again. I'm going to delete this. There you go. Refresh. Super admin and editor. You can change that too, since I messed up there. There you go. So the Eloquent ORM automatically creates your timestamps for you. Here's our names. So now this user bob@me.com currently doesn't have a role. So if you come over here and you have role user, there isn't a role assigned to them. So we need to link that role to, or have a default role for that user. And you can modify the registration. So if you go up to HTTP controller, auth, and register controller, here by default you can also add that user to a default role. So you can say return user equals, and now that I just put this create user into this variable, now that I have the user, I can also create a role. So we actually need one more model now to work with the role user table. So PHP artisan make model role user, like that. And if you come over here and open role user, you can specify protected. You can specify the I think there's a table. I guess that's role. I think it's just one role user, just one, just like that, just to confirm that everything's good there. So then you could say role user. I guess we could make a record. Now here you could potentially use attach, and attach works too, but this works just as well. So role user, and then you'll say user ID equals u.id, and then role ID equals, and you can say so for me I think it's 2, and then here role save. So here's the problem. 2 might not be the same role for you. Did you see how I had 2 different IDs here for roles? So ID isn't going to work right. So you should look up your role specifically here. So you can say role equals role where, is it role? Let's see, role name. I think it's role name. Where name equals, what do I call it? Editor. or slug equals editor. Slug equals editor, and then you can say first, and then ID, just like that. Well, this would be the role, this would be the role user. There you go. So now you looked up which ID, or you pull the first record that has editor in it, you put it into this variable, you created a brand new user role, save, and on registration, that should save it for you that way. So we need to actually test a new registration and see if it works now. So come over here, click this, log out, log out. Oh, actually, my server is down. So there we go. So here I'll create an account, and I'll say user 2, and then I'll say user at me.com, and register. Ooh. So when I actually did role here, it didn't pull in the role like I thought it would. Which I thought it would actually pull it in, which is right there. And it didn't pull it in like I wanted it to. Refresh. So because it failed, now it's throwing an error saying, yo, that user account already exists. So we'll have to create a different account. User 23, user 1. And now it's saying the role user doesn't exist, which I thought it did. Oh, you're supposed to say new. There you go. And refresh. And again, it's going to say, yeah, this user exists. Let's go with number 3. And there we go. So a little bit of a rocky start there, but there we go. So user number 4 has role number 2. So if you go to user number 4 has role number 2. Now what happens if you don't have a role on login? So can we handle that? So let's say for some reason that role was kicked from you. You should default to the editor role. You can even create, you can even create a functional function. I think we'll do it. So validator. If we go down to login controller, construct manual guest logout. Home controller might work too here. That's okay. What I was thinking is, how do we handle those accounts that we actually don't have the roles for? We can create a migration or a seeder. So let's create a seeder so we can seed all the roles that we need to fix existing accounts. So you'll say PHP artisan make seeder and say attach roles like that. And then you can say users equal user all, and then you can for each users as user. So I'll get all the users and I'll loop through each user, and I can create a new role. So now I need to determine the, let's go to back to a register controller, grab this, go back to attach roles, paste this. So I still need role. I guess I could just do it like this here. There we go. And then here, do the same there. Role. Don't need this. So now we have user.id and role.id there. Now what happens if that role already exists? Well, in that case, it'll make 2 records. So you can do Laravel's create or update. So Laravel first, or I think it's like create first or update. Well, exactly how it was eloquent framework. I think it's like create or update. Create. There is a create or update function. Basically, if it exists, it'll update it, and if it doesn't exist, it'll create it. So it looks something like this. You could use this instead, obviously. Don't need that. So first or new, and this would be a normal array. There we go. So basically you're checking user ID against role ID and passing this through here and passing this through here. Comma. So there you go. First, so it'll loop through each user, and it'll try to find this person and update them, or it'll create a brand new record. So if it can't find this user right here, then it'll create a brand new record. So then let's run our seeder here. And our seeder is called attach roles. And let's take a look at our database. It looks like we set up all the roles. So everybody has role 2. Now there's one role that I want to be super admin, and I think it was the original Bob. So here in the original Bob, you can go to, I think it was number 1, and you can give him role number 1 as well. Okay, so now the roles are set up. So the last thing I want to do is basically surround something, catch something. So basically saying you can't submit a joke unless you have permission. So here we'll say, you know, oh, that's misspelled, we should fix that. But here we can say you don't have permission to create a joke. So we'll do something, a simple implementation right now that we can later build on. So I'm going to close everything here to reduce confusion and go to resources, views, partials, and create a joke. So right here we can create a function right here and say, let's say, you know, if user, which I don't think user is defined, but we can do user has role, and we can say editor, then they can do this. Else and if. Like that. So this, and then if they don't have it, we can do alert. I can do, I think it's a maybe do div, or is it a span? maybe it's a span, I don't know. Yeah, we'll say don't have permission to create joke. Here, you can say alert info. So we just need to create this has role function now in the user model. So here we can say public function has role, and then you'll pass here the desired role, and then I think you can just determine this role. Let's see what's going on here. On the home controller, you can add the same check right here. I think we're under index, jokes right here. So we can do auth as well. I just want to test this because it's easier to test it from the home controller. So it looks like the role that I have is editor. So we need to, has role can be converted over user roles. I can convert this, I could pluck role, no, not role, it's like name, not name, it's slug, to array, like that. And basically say if in array, and this would be your needle and haystack, so it can be role, comma, and then it would be this role. This is an interesting way of doing it. Return true. And also return false. So what did I do here? So I took all the roles that are assigned to the user through role user, and pulled out the names of the roles. There would be a slug, basically like a slug, and converted to an array. Then I check against the array every time you call has role. And you could do more things like cache this in the future. And the better role permissions and role packages actually will cache this list of roles for you, so that you don't have to keep hitting the database. But we'll optimize that soon. So there we go. Hit this. Everything's good. Now let's delete this role for this user 23, to test this. So user 23. I think it's this one before. We'll give this role, we'll delete this role right here. Actually, we'll just change it. We'll change the role ID to 3. That role does not exist, so they shouldn't be able to submit anything. Refresh. Am I the wrong user? Let's check this really fast. So I do have editor, and here I'm checking if I have the role editor, which is correct. So everything's good. Oh, so it's the wrong user then. So maybe it's not. Maybe it's this one. No, is it this user? User ID is 4. Let's do 3. I think it's 3 maybe. Oh, it's 4. This one. Yeah, I picked the wrong user. Alright, here we go. And refresh. I don't have that role. Let's go to the home controller. Don't need this here. Clean up my home controller. There we go. So now this is correct and it should work properly. Click this and it says basically, oh, well, right now I'm just dying this, so let me remove this. All my debug code. Fresh, there we go. Click it and it says you don't have permission to view this, to create a joke. And then if I add it back to 2, it'll say, oh, this is not dynamic. There we go. Now I do have permission. So that's it. A simple little implementation of roles using Laravel. Later we can actually session this into a cache and then check against cache instead, so that you're not hitting the database, because right now you're hitting the database every time you check for role. Every time I use this, I'm hitting the database. And the advantage of using it like this is we can then cache this specific response, or this response right here can be cached however we want. So maybe next time we'll optimize that, and we'll continue to improve on the role system. Right now you can have mini roles because it checks to see if you're an array, so any one of those roles will work. So let's say, for example, instead of doing this, I can be an array here. So this should be an array. Then we would do intersect, array intersect check. So right now you're passing a single role, but what if you wanted multiple people to be, what if you wanted multiple roles access to your area? For example, an editor or a super admin can access this, right? So you can write the code for that way. But I think there's a better way to do it. I think right now we'll just leave it like this, and we'll improve on it as we go. So hope you like today's video. Again, this is a rudimentary implementation of roles into the joke system. I do recommend you use an official package, but you need to see this, how it functions and how it works in the back end on your own. And it usually consists of 2 tables for roles and 2 more tables for permissions and 2 more tables for abilities. So you want to be able to control, in a real life application scenario, you have many different things. Like you might only be finance, for example, but you can still do some random things that you need permissions to do, so that you don't have to change roles or add additional roles, because roles are usually a group of permissions. Does that make sense? And permissions are usually a group of abilities. So you can break that down even finer. So you can say like, hey, this person can see this little piece of information because of the permission that he has, but this person can't. The next step would probably be to create an interface where a super admin can give people roles and subtract roles from people or change it. But since we're dealing with 2 roles, I really only care about the editor role, and then until we start dealing with more roles, I'm not going to implement a system where you can manage these roles. I think we can do that next, or when we approach that situation. I don't think it's important at this time. When building an application, if you get too deep into one specific area of the application, you're going to find yourself digging a hole so deep that you're going to overwhelm yourself. So you want to implement a rudimentary system, then you want to move on, and then on your second layer come through. That's not the case for everything. Sometimes you need to finish the job. For example, login and authentication. You should probably finish that job. Registration, login, it should just work. But 2-factor authentication might come later. Does that make sense? So you have to be able to logically function that works well. So every function you build should be well built and should be functional, but it doesn't have to be full featured. So, but it shouldn't not work. Does that make sense? So you should be able to do password resets, but maybe the fact that you can throttle password resets or time them out. Maybe you add that later. Does that make sense? So think in that way. Try not to get um, caught up or stumble on a specific feature that you really want to implement, but then there's all these other things. Because most of the time, your task list for application development is usually through the roof. Your to-do list is going to be thousands of items. So how do you logically get through all that? Well, you do it in layers, like cake. When you're building a cake, you start with the bottom layer first, and then the second layer. Or when you're building a house, you start with the foundation. You don't worry about plumbing, you know, or you do worry about plumbing, but you worry about it in a very light way, not fully like, hey, we have to get all our plumbing in right now. No, build a foundation, start working on something else. Plumbing will come after. You can always drill a hole afterwards, and get through. Anyways, enough of that. Have a good day. See you.